Hello friends, I am Xander D, and today I am going to be reviewing Dune Part 2. I just watched this film last night, so I have a pretty good memory of it. I enjoyed this film. This is of course directed by Denis Villeneuve, just like Dune Part 1. This had a lot more action in it, so for those of us looking for the action in the Dune franchise, this Part 2 is definitely going to satisfy those fans. So let's go into the story of it. It picks up right after Dune Part 1, showing Paul Atreides and his mother living with the Fremen on Arrakis, and of course still fighting the Sardaukar. Now, they have some new cast members introduced in this Part 2. Let me just go over a few names I wrote down. We have, of course, the great Timothée Chalamet returning as Paul Atreides. Zendaya as Shani returns, of course. Rebecca Ferguson as Paul's mom. I don't remember her name, but she's also returning, as well as Josh Brolin, Dave Bautista as a villain, and Stellan Skarsgård as a villain also returns. But as far as the new characters go, we've got Christopher Walken as the Emperor. Now, he didn't have a lot of dialogue in the film, but when he had something to say, it was captivating. It was definitely captivating. Also, Florence Pugh showed up as, I wouldn't say exactly a villain, but definitely someone to look forward in the franchise. I don't want to spoil who her character is, but very close to Paul in the sequel and following books. So for you fans reading the books, of course, you know who Florence Pugh's character is. You know how important she is to Paul's destiny. So, moving on, we also have Javier Bardem returns from the first movie. He had a lot more to do in this, showing Paul the ways of living on Arrakis. I was very excited to see how they would explain the worms and the waters of life. They did that perfectly, just like in David Lynch's original Dune film from 1984. They showed a sequence that was exactly what I wanted to see, how they got the waters of life. Won't spoil it for those of you who haven't seen it. They just dropped it on streaming, so I assume if it's 24 hours or more, you've already seen it, okay? So, after going over the cast list, let's go over some of the highlights of the film. So, we get to find out that the Atreides had an arsenal of atomic weapons on Arrakis that we never saw in the first film, that really gives Paul an upper hand when it comes to fighting the other houses and fighting with the Baron and the Harkonnens. So we find out later on in the film that basically Paul didn't want to accept the title of prophet. He didn't want to lead all these people into what he believed would be their death. But then later on throughout the film, you see he takes on the responsibility of being their leader, their prophet, and then he eventually leads them from the north to the south to raise an army. And his mother plays a very critical part in this, just like in the original Dune from 1984. But you get to see more in this version of the film. You get to see more of the baby. There's a lot of baby shots, baby's perspective, which I loved. I didn't think I'd ever see that in a movie before, but very interesting to see. And then, of course, they gave Paul's sister dialogue, actually. The mother was interpreting what the baby was saying, and I thought that was perfect because that actually comes from the lore of the books and from the original movie, David Lynch's 1984. So I was very excited to see that. We even get a glimpse into the future, and we see an actress that plays Paul's sister, Anna Taylor-Joy, which I didn't know if they would do that, but I'm very excited because that sets up Dune Messiah. So very interested to see that. So let's go over just the third act, kind of, the final battle sequence of the film. So I was wondering if they would do this, but they do show, midway through the film, Paul learning to ride the sandworm, of course. And this is a big part of the movie, in the original and in this part 2. But I was wondering how would they show off the battle, because there's supposed to be lots of people riding these sandworms, and they even have like tents and stuff built up on them, flags. They showed it off perfectly, guys. For anyone wondering, this is probably the best sci-fi adaptation of a book novel to film in the last 10 or 15 years. So I definitely recommend checking this out. There's also some family drama between the Atreides and the Harkonnens. You find out when Paul takes the waters of life, because if you've read the books, you know Paul has to take the waters of life to basically see the future and to plot out his next move in the upcoming war. Sort of like Doctor Strange, looking at all the realities, possible outcomes for the upcoming battle in Endgame. Well, after Paul takes the waters of life, he sees his full destiny into the future, him taking a crusade of soldiers into space and battling great houses, having all this crazy space life, and he basically says right in front of everybody, after challenging the Emperor, that he would take his daughter's hand in marriage. So kind of throwing shade on Shanti, but at the same time, that's how it went down in the books. So very Game of Thrones, savage-like. So I was very interested in seeing that. I didn't think they would do that in the second movie, but they did. So I was very interested to see that. The battle sequence between Freyd Rautha and Paul Atreides is probably the best battle scene I've seen since Raid, one of the Raid films. If anyone has seen those, definitely check those out. I didn't think it would be so short. The final battle was like, they built up to it, and then you thought Paul was going to lose, and then Paul pulled the same trick on Freyd Rautha that Freyd Rautha had pulled in the Gladiator sequence when he was fighting other people. He just turned the knife on the other guy. So, kind of a big build-up to a little fight, right? But then Paul starts taking his armada, his Fremen soldiers, and Josh Brolin, of course, because he's his right hand, into space to fight the great houses. And that, I didn't think they would show that either, because in the first Dune movie, they clearly say the Fremen never leave their homeworld. So the fact that they were able to get on ships and leave with Paul shows they're all in. They're all invested in this war. Ride or die, if you will. So I'm very excited for the next installment, Dune Messiah. I've heard they've already started working on the script. Denis Villeneuve can't let this one go. He's got to make the best trilogy that any sci-fi creator has done. He's going to blow everyone out of the water. Not to say that there aren't going to be good sci-fi coming out in the next year or so, but I'm just saying I haven't seen anything on par with Dune Part 2 in a long time. So, if you guys like the video, make sure to like and subscribe. Follow my channel. I'm also on Instagram, so make sure to check out my page on there. But until next time, bye-bye.